Welcome to On the Corner of Main Street, presented by Plaza Hotel and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. Here is Plaza CEO Jonathan Jossel, Gary Vickery, and I'm your host, Lisa Melmed.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of On the Corner of Main Street. My name is Gary, obviously, because you've listened to the podcast before. Jonathan, how are you today?
Doing good, Gary. Thank you. You're doing a good job filling in for Lisa, who's not with us today.
Yeah, she'll be back for next week's episode.
I sure hope so. I sure hope so. How's things going? Everything good?
Coming off another crazy weekend. It was good. It was busy. Felt good here at the hotel.
Yeah, I told someone it was actually our second best weekend since the reopening in June. So it was a good sign. Good sign. Not crazy, but it's a sign that things are starting to slowly get back to a little bit of normalcy. Obviously, midweek is still very slow. But what's cool this week is we're actually able to do the Pickleball Open. And we have about 600 people at the pool, not at the same time, but taking turns to play in the tournament. And from Tuesday till Saturday, we're having the Pickleball Open. And the popularity of this sport is mind-blowing to me, how many people are into pickleball.
Right. So this is our third annual pickleball event.
Yep, third annual.
It keeps growing every year.
Yeah.
Even in tough times.
Well, listen, it's outdoors. It's safe. We're not doing any fans this year, so that's a shame. But the tournament itself is popular. People are here. People flew in from Reno, from not all over the country, but West Coast to play in this tournament. And I'm pretty proud of that. I think next year it's going to be even bigger and better. So, yeah.
It's a shame we don't have Life is Beautiful this year.
It is, yeah. This would have just finished.
Right into it.
This would have just finished last weekend. So, yeah, listen, that was always a fun weekend. But I think everyone knew that was not going to be able to happen this year. So it is what it is. We move on, and next year it'll be back. Bigger and better.
Best of the situation.
Absolutely.
Today, we are joined by famed author and gaming historian Dave Schwartz. Welcome to On the Corner of Main Street. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Great.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, what's up?
Nice to see you after a little while.
It's been a while.
Well,
Good
even before the pandemic, I don't think
Yeah.
I saw you. I think last time I saw you was the Cass Business School.
I think
lectures.
it was. Which was a year and a half ago now.
Oh, because that's right. They skipped the one this year. We had to cancel, obviously. Yeah, so it's probably a year and a half. I haven't seen you.
Yeah.
You doing okay?
Doing all right.
I know I asked you this before, but for the sake of our listeners, UNLV's back open?
Yeah. I mean, most of the classes are remote. I think maybe about 15% of them are in person. So the people who really have to have in-person stuff like labs, that's in person. Most everything else is remote, though.
Yeah. And to start with, I guess, what is your role at UNLV?
I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs.
So say that again.
Associate Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And what exactly does that do?
Answers a lot of questions from faculty, works with the faculty in their tenure and promotion, on all kinds of success things. It's quite a gig.
Huh. So it's not specific to one program at UNLV?
No, it's all faculty.
So it's not
tenured, non-tenured, faculty and residents, pretty much everybody.
So why then is your main focus history?
Because that's my academic background. I went into the administration about a year ago.
Okay. And how did you get into the history of Vegas?
The history of Vegas is actually, it's a story that starts in New Jersey, in Atlantic City, where I grew up.
Okay.
And one of my earliest memories is watching them blow up all those classic old hotels and build these really modern casinos. So I always kind of wondered, why would they do that? What are casinos? Why would people build them?
When you were in New Jersey?
When I was in New Jersey.
So you watched these implosions?
Yeah. So I watched those and got me thinking, why would people want to blow up hotels and build casinos? And what is the power of casino gaming? So when I went to graduate school at UCLA in history and I had to pick a dissertation topic, I said, well, maybe I'll write about the history of casinos, because there hasn't been a lot written about that. Huh. And that's how I got into it.
And you had several positions in Atlantic City casinos growing up, correct?
Yeah, I did.
From all the way from security to surveillance, so you were kind of all over the place.
Yeah, definitely. And Mr. Peanut, too. You don't want to forget that one.
Right. Which of the hotels did you work at in Atlantic City?
The Taj Mahal.
Okay.
And also I worked at Bally's Grand, and Mr. Peanut was at the Tropicana. Although at that point it was Trop World. They were in the middle of a branding thing, which is this is a great casino branding idea. Like, okay, Tropicana, recognized brand worldwide. We'll change the name of the casino to Trop World. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Genius.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, they changed the pack a couple years later.
So you and I have something in common then, which I didn't realize, is we both did our dissertations on the casino industry. Mine was focused on casino industry coming to the UK, which is where I was at the time. What exactly were you looking at? Were you looking at the business of it? Were you looking at the psychology behind gaming? Were you looking at the history of Las Vegas? What was the sort of focus of that?
Well, the discipline was history, so that was the primary focus. But I was really looking at why people culturally chose to do this. So why did people say, well, gambling in a city is bad, but if we gamble in these little places out in Las Vegas, that's good. So I was looking at that aspect, the cultural aspect, also looking at the political aspect. Why did the state of Nevada encourage the industry to grow, especially after 1950 or so? Why did they get behind it? And then in the 70s and 80s, why did other jurisdictions then decide to adopt casino gaming? And it was because of what had happened in Nevada and what had happened in Las Vegas.
Huh. And just for my own knowledge, how did you get from Atlantic City to UCLA? And why?
I applied and they let me in. It's a bit of I'm sure somebody lost their job over that. It's a bit of a mystery to me. But yeah, I applied to a couple of schools and that was the one that took me. So that's how I ended up in UCLA.
And what year was that?
That was 95.
Okay, so I mean, by that point, though, Vegas was already pretty established. It was you weren't here, and you're not that old. But you sort of missed the formative years of Vegas. By 95, Mirage was already built.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's when you picked up the study of it. From that point.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time and you could meet with anyone from the history of Vegas to have dinner with, who would you choose?
I think Carl Cohen from the Sands, because everybody says really good stuff about him, so he would be interesting.
I've never even heard of him, so tell me who that is.
He is, so everybody I've talked to, like Steve Wynn, Jack Binion, and everybody I've talked to has said he is the best casino manager in the history of the business. Carl Cohen just knew the business backward and forward, was great with the customers, was great with the game protection, but also really good with the customers. Perfect with the customers and could solve any problem. Except for the one problem he couldn't solve without violence, which I'll talk about in a little bit.
Okay. So why is Carl Cohen not more known? Why is he not more high profile? Everyone hears about some of the other figures that sort of were here back in the day. What's Carl Cohen? How did he come to be?
Yeah, I think it's because he wasn't an owner. He was just a manager. And he never, doesn't get that credit because that was a much more, I guess, anonymous time where you didn't really do things to get your name in the paper. You did them just to, make the bosses happy and make yourself happy. So I think it was a time where that kind of promotion wasn't really expected for casino managers. They were, basically they wanted to stay under the radar.
Got it. And he was at the Sands.
He was at the Sands, yeah.
Do you feature him in your new book, At the Sands?
Oh yeah. He's definitely in there.
Okay.
What about downtown? Are you familiar with downtown, the history of downtown? You mentioned Jack Binion, but what about Benny? Have you studied that era?
Yeah, and there's a lot of people, including Jackie Gaughan, who was one of the big people behind the plaza. I mean, they really, I think, deserve a lot of credit. Obviously, it wasn't on the scale of the Strip, but they still were some of the pioneers at creating casinos that people wanted to come to.
And in your studies, because this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about, in your studies, in your history, what do you think it is about those times that made a casino something people wanted to go to? I mean, you've studied the psychology of it, obviously. Where does that come from?
I think everybody brings a little bit of a different angle to it. For some, it was the personal touch. So like Jackie Gaughan, I mean, you've probably heard the stories about him driving around the parking garage, waiting to give people a jump start and stuff like that, and just always being there for the customers and the employees. I think that's part of it. They were able to create a real culture here downtown and just create a place kind of like Cheers where everybody knew your name, where you felt welcome. So I think that was what they could do here that you couldn't do so much on the Strip after it got to a certain size.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you.
What are your thoughts on downtown now versus when you came in lot and any of the history that you've researched?
I think the downtown has really turned a corner. I think if we go back 15 years or so, a lot of people would overlook downtown. Yeah. And, downtown was impacted a lot more than the Strip. after you had California tribal gaming really get started, that really impacted the drive-in customer, which was a lot of downtown's base then. And I think downtown has done a great job in the past couple of years of reinventing itself. And I think, and this is what I'd like to tell people, like, okay, if you want to study casinos and competition and all that, don't go to the Strip, go to downtown. Okay. And just think of the billions of dollars that have been spent building the Strip, and downtown is still a viable attraction, despite all that, which I think is really incredible. So if you want to see what works, I think you should come down here.
Well, it's an attraction partly because of the history.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not partly, largely because of the history. People want to see that history. People want to remind themselves of the old neon, the glitz, the glamour, the mob. What is it about that you think people are so fascinated by? And the mob, why is the mob so popular?
The mob, it's amazing. The mob is just popular. I think it feeds into a lot of people's fantasies, I guess, just about, you could solve everything with one phone call. And of course, in these fantasies, you're friends with the people in the mob and they're not, extorting you, but which is probably different in real life, and I think it's just about the fact that today everything is so bureaucratized and people see this everywhere around them. It just seems like everything is dominated by these big corporations, and people look back at the mob days and say, well, it was all based on relationships, which again, probably if we got an FBI agent in here, they could probably disabuse us of that, how benevolent it was. But I think that's the image that it has. So I think that's why people are attracted to it.
Okay, so I'm fascinated to get back to the Carl Cohen guy.
Mm-hmm.
They say Carl Cohen? That's correct.
Cohen, yeah. Cohen.
So what was you've written books about slots, about table games protection. Do you think they're still teaching that in the right way today? Is that still getting conveyed, or is that lost some of its charm with how technologically advanced surveillance cameras have become? I mean, the old days you had the eye in the sky and you had to check basically everything through a piece of glass that you were standing over. That's a skill set that is not being translated into today.
Yeah, I mean, for good and for bad. I think if you asked anybody back then, they would love to be around today where you have, back then when it was just literally standing behind the mirror, there was no evidence. You couldn't take something to court. Now you've got that. So I think that's great. I think the biggest difference with casinos isn't technological, it's organizational. Mm-hmm. So back in the day, up until about the 70s, 80s, the casino manager really ran the show. There was no real separate human resources. So they just did things very much differently, where literally that was the person that decides if you have a job or not. I think human resources coming in changed the dynamic a lot, and the managers on the floor lost some of their power, which is good and bad. I mean, it's great that we have protections for employees now that you didn't then. I mean, I heard a lot of stories from people who were basically fired, like, your table lost a lot of money. Yeah. You're gone.
You're gone.
Yeah, you keep dumping money, was what they called it when the customers won, right. Which they should do sometimes.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, it's better today from that angle.
What do you think has been lost since those days?
I think what's been lost is that feeling that they had of sort of being elite, where, if you were a dealer, you were a boss around town. Like, people looked up to you. I think that's been lost, but again, a lot's been gained, protections, employment protections, things like that. So it's definitely a double-edged sword.
I love what you said about casino managers ran the joints. I think you're absolutely right. We've gotten so far away from that, where casinos are just a small piece of the business, or a medium-sized piece of the business, but everyone's so focused on conventions and rooms and food and beverage and nightclubs and entertainment. What's been refreshing about the last 4 or 5 months since we reopened is casinos once again become the focus, because there is none of that other stuff right now. And so casino has become the focus, and there's a much bigger emphasis on that casino experience. And I haven't seen yet the shift to empowering casino managers, but you're absolutely right. That's something, it is a hierarchical structure that changed over time, from casino managers being the real bosses to general managers, VPs, and all these other positions that then came in subsequently. Hadn't thought of it like that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting now because we have seen a lot of that other stuff stripped away. So there is going to be a pretty big change, I think.
Yeah. For the sake of our listeners, if you wouldn't mind, tell us the history of the Sands, because I think a lot of people don't even know what the Sands is.
Oh, the Sands is probably the most iconic, classic Las Vegas casino. Plaza accepted, of course.
Thank you. I was waiting for that.
Yeah. It opened in 1952, and the guy out front was a guy named Jake Friedman, who came up from Houston, and he wore a cowboy hat. He was very popular. Everybody liked him. He was always shaking hands, giving out money, that kind of stuff. And when you give out money, people like you.
What was he giving out money for?
Because he was a gambler, and
he was a customer there?
No, he was a gambling operator, and he was a gambler himself.
Got
and
it.
Hey, it's all part of the thing.
So
I'll
it's
give
like
you some
us
money.
giving free play today.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, but he was doing it with cash.
He was doing it with cash, yeah.
Okay.
So that was his thing. He literally would go around with his pockets stuffed with bills and give them all out. That was just his thing. So he was the face of the operation, but the real people behind it were couple other folks who maybe were a little bit more organized, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So you had people like Frank Costello in New York, Meyer Lansky, Doc Stacher, who was I think he was still in New Jersey then, but he was going to move out to LA pretty soon.
And the Sands, sorry to interrupt you, the Sands is where the Venetian is today.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically you had a bunch of different groups in there, and the thing that defined the Sands was the entertainment. Jack and Trotter came out from New York, where he was running the Copacabana Club and ran the Copa Room at the Sands. And he was the one who signed Frank Sinatra. He signed all the big players. Danny Thomas was their opening act, and every year he would come back in the anniversary and do shows, and he was always part of the casino. Pretty, up to when they reopened the Copa in '82, he was the one who reopened it. So he was pretty much associated with this hotel for about 30 years.
Wow.
Which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
But Jack and Trotter was the one who put it together. Carl Cohen came in '53, right around the time that Frank Sinatra started playing, and he took over the casino manager, and that really was their team.
So the entertainment is what defined it as this legendary location.
Yeah, if you look at the physical plant of the building, the buildings themselves, they're really plain. This is before they built that tower, and it was just it was 5 basically bungalow-style hotel wings that looked like motels. It was pretty plain looking, and it was the entertainment that drew people.
You mentioned Frank Sinatra, but the whole Rat Pack was there. The Rat Pack is what made that place. Well, they both made each other.
They did. So the Rat Pack first came together on stage in January of 1960. What had happened was Frank Sinatra got the rights to make a movie called Ocean's 11, and basically said, okay, we're going to make the movie. I want to have fun with my friends, all night, wake up at 4:00 in the afternoon and do a couple of scenes. So he wasn't, it wasn't like this was going to be their cinematic masterpiece. But since you had Dean and Sammy and Peter Lawford and Joey Bishop in town, Al Freeman, who was the PR guy at the Sands, said, hey, why don't we put Frank, Dean, and Sammy on stage? We'll put them all up there. And that was the birth of what later became known as the Rat Pack.
Wow. And you mentioned Frank specifically, but any great stories come to mind when you think of him from his days back then?
Oh, yeah.
Was he a good guy? I mean, I've read in some other books that he was not always the nicest guy.
No. And this is the story of how Frank left the Sands, if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so it's Labor Day 1967. Okay, and Frank is not happy for a lot of reasons. Howard Hughes has bought the Sands. Now, Hughes and Sinatra never got along. Frank was more liberal-leaning. Hughes was very conservative. They both were in love with Ava Gardner at different points. And of course, Ava broke Frank's heart. So they never got along. So Hughes took over, and basically they put in a lot of cash controls in the casino. It used to be that if you knew the bosses, you could just get a marker on your name. And, as I was told, if they said, oh, no, I only asked for $30,000, not 40, Carl Cohen's thing was, okay, the first one we'll give you, the second one will have a talk, and there won't be a third time.
Okay.
That was just his thing. Like, all right, first one we'll give you, fine. But, yeah. So here's the situation. Labor Day, Frank says, I'm not going to go on. I won't sing. They have to call Sammy Davis Jr. in L.A. and charter a plane to fly him up. And he literally comes on stage and saves the day. That weekend,
Sammy performs
instead of Frank. Yeah.
Okay.
That weekend, so then now we're into Friday. Friday night, Frank goes on again. And there are 6 Apollo astronauts in the audience. And he does a rendition of Fly Me to the Moon. and it's great. Now, after the show, Frank wants to show the Apollo guys some fun. And remember, this is when the astronauts were the biggest heroes in America. So he goes to the pit boss and he's like, can I have $50,000? And like, no, sorry, Frank, we can't do that. You know, the word came down from the top. We can't give you any more credit. And the Apollo astronauts say, well, you know, we kind of have an early morning tomorrow. Maybe we should head in. And Frank was livid. Frank was it embarrassed him so much. He was livid. So there's a lot of back and forth. He actually flew back home to Palm Springs and then flew back out again Sunday night. And then got into a confrontation, ran into the switchboard because they wouldn't connect him to Jack and Trotter or Carl Cohen, ran into the switchboard room, pulled out all the wires, threatened a security guard, and finally around 5 a.m, Carl Cohen, they called Carl Cohen. Cohen comes down and meets him at the Garden Room, which was their coffee shop, and they exchange words, and Sinatra flipped the table on Cohen, and Cohen just going back to instinct, and this was a guy who'd been a bootlegger. He was a big guy, like about over 250, 6 feet tall, just a big solid guy. Just instinctually, right hook, boom, hit him in the mouth. Hit Frank in the mouth.
Wow.
Frank is down on the floor. He's like, oh my God, what do we do? He ends up, that was around 5:36 in the morning. At 9 o'clock, a press release comes out from Caesar's Palace saying, we've signed Frank Sinatra to a multi-year agreement.
That was my next question. Yeah, where did he go?
Frank, so there's a lot of there's conspiracy theories about this. Some people think, well, the whole thing was just an act, but Frank did lose the caps in 2 of his teeth. So I don't think he was that that much of a good soldier. Yeah, he would go for that. But obviously, him leaving was already in the cards. But
incredible! What a story.
Yeah.
So he went to Caesars after that.
Yes, he went to Caesar's Palace.
Didn't he end up down with Wynn?
Yes, eventually. So it's Caesars. It's kind of funny. A couple years later, Sandy Waterman, who was a manager there and who had been friends with Sinatra for years, actually pulls a gun on Sinatra in 1970 for something very similar. So his luck didn't get better, and that he did end up mending fences with Caesars eventually. But yeah, the 60s and 70s was a rough time for Frank Sinatra in Vegas.
Oh, wow. Yeah, see, a lot of that doesn't get covered, just his legendary status gets covered. But it's interesting. So the Sands was the first ones to sort of prioritize entertainment.
Yes.
Because I was just learning a little about Kirk Corrigan the other day, and he booked Elvis, and who was the lady that he booked over at the...
Barbra Streisand.
Barbra Streisand, yeah, thank you, Barbra Streisand. And I thought he was the one who sort of pioneered the headliners, but it sounds like Sands was doing it first.
Well, Elvis at the Hilton was on a whole different level. You know, the Copa room was about 500 rooms at the max. The
500 seats.
Yeah, 500 seats, sorry. The Hilton showroom, International showroom, and then Hilton showroom was about 1,500 to 2,000.
Okay.
So it's just on a different level where, in Elvis, people would, Elvis probably sold out more than Frank, but Frank brought more money to the casino than Elvis.
Right.
Although it helped that Colonel Parker was a big gambler. So that was Elvis's manager, so it kind of helped.
He was gambling.
Yes.
He was playing all the money he was making back into the casino.
Yeah, so that kind of helped.
Wow, what great stories.
Yeah.
And you just learned this over time.
Yeah.
Just through the course of... And what about the books you're now writing? How did you get into books?
So writing books, I think, came out of just being a historian in grad school, and I turned my dissertation into a book, and then I haven't looked back since then. And, lately it's just...
Your dissertation on the casino industry.
Development, yeah.
Which one's that? What's that
That's
called?
Suburban Xanadu. Because that's with an academic publisher. I think it's up to like $80 for the paperback. Very expensive, not very accessible. So I wouldn't, if you're looking for one, I wouldn't suggest that one. Just,
Okay. Okay.
Then I think Grandissimo is the book that most people have connected with. That's about Jay Sarno. It's got, it's kind of a very exciting story in Caesar's Palace.
It's the story of how Jay Sarno came to be with Caesar's Palace. Yeah, I read it.
Yeah, and Circus. And then the latest one.
And many people thought that the new casino was going to be called Grandissimo.
Yeah.
But did you come up with that name, or was that an existing name that he was going to call Caesars?
That was what he was going to call. He was trying to build. So he built Caesar's Palace. He built Circus. Then he was trying to build this third casino called the Grandissimo.
Got it.
That would have been a mega resort. It would have been 4,000 rooms. I think he later increased it to 6,000 rooms. Basically imagine the MGM Grand, but probably bigger and with, water rides, a water slide going
Right.
outside and stuff like that. But he never got the money for it.
That was and that was in what year?
That was, he passed away in 84, so this was the late 70s, early 80s that he was pitching that.
Yeah, and many people credit him as being sort of the godfather of Vegas in terms of building the mega resorts. Again, I don't think he gets the fame for that the credit for that he probably deserves.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the whole themed aspect of Las Vegas, that was all Jay Sarno.
Right.
Before he showed up, you had... everything was pretty homogenous. And
Right.
yeah, you could get a great $5 steak and you could play craps. And that was great, but that was not the kind of thing that will make people aspirational. And I think that's what Sarno really started.
Yeah, I totally agree. So after Grandissimo, you did also Tales from the Pit,
Oh, yeah.
Tales from the Slot Floor, Roll the Bones.
Yeah.
I mean, you've done a lot of books at this point.
Yes. Yeah.
And the focus on all of them is Las Vegas or just gaming in general?
Gaming, I wrote one book about Atlantic City. So
Okay.
that
Which one was that?
That was Boardwalk Playground.
Okay.
So I was focused on Atlantic City. My worst selling book out of any of them. So probably not.
Because no
gonna
one
do-
cares about Atlantic City.
Yes, this was made painfully
That
clear
is
to me.
not true. That's
Sorry,
not true
sorry,
at all.
sorry.
We could do a whole hour just on the Revel Casino in Atlantic
Yeah.
City because I wanted to ask you about smoking.
Yeah.
And I know some of the when MGM opens up at the end of the month and Park MGM, they're talking about opening up as not completely non-smoking casinos, which is one of the things the Revel tried back in 2010.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on smoking? And now that there's a new emphasis on gaming in Las Vegas since entertainment's closed down and conventions aren't happening, what are your thoughts on smoking right now?
I think it makes sense to experiment with non-smoking just because, we know that a lot of gamblers are smokers, but I think there's a lot of people that are also not smokers. I think it's just a smart thing to do, so it's good that they're doing it. We'll see how it goes, and hopefully they're successful and other places look at adopting that.
I don't think it sticks. I don't think it has a chance.
All right.
Sorry. That's just my opinion. But I do think that more places should do what I saw at San Manuel, which is a non-smoking section. So have a glassed-in area with slots or tables or whatever you want, which is a purely non-smoking area. But to have an entire casino non-smoking, I don't think works long term. It's just an opinion. I hope I'm wrong. Actually, I think it's a nice idea, but I don't see it happen. Don't see it sticking.
I think you'd have to do it at the level of the jurisdiction, so if you look at a lot of states, Maryland, it's all non-smoking and has been from the start. So I think you'd have to do it that way. And definitely it wouldn't be an easy process, but something to think about.
Any other topical trends, Gary, you're thinking? Smoking? I mean, what do you make of the current climate in Las Vegas and everything that's transpired in the last 6 months?
I think it's really difficult. I think this is the biggest challenge the city has ever faced. Las Vegas really evolved to fit a certain model where you had a split between the gaming, conventions, entertainment, you had a substantial fly-in, you had a substantial international dimension to it, and now a lot of that's been taken away and we don't know when it's coming back. So I think any one of them, even if you just took out the $2 billion or so that the international guests brought to Las Vegas last year, you'd already be struggling.
Right.
So I think it's time to get creative and try new stuff because there's just not, we can't just wait and say, okay, they're going to hit a button and all this is going to come back overnight. I think it's going to take time to build up again.
Yeah, it for sure. And what about other states? Have you followed that closely? Other than Atlantic City, have you followed the proliferation of casinos into other states?
Yeah.
And do you think that's a big problem for Las Vegas?
Well, it wasn't historically because on the Strip and downtown, they were able to basically create other attractions that people couldn't do there. So you had entertainment that you couldn't get at the other places. Now that that's gone and it's just competing on slots and table games, it's a lot harder. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the reasons. And, also we've seen, if you look at the numbers, and I'm kind of putting my number nerd hat on here, if you look at the numbers from the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority over the past couple of years, there's sort of this hierarchy of guests where the international guest is probably the most valuable one just on an ROI basis. They tend to spend more, they stay longer, they spend more. They might gamble a little bit less, although the high rollers offset that. You then have your domestic fly-in guest, and then you have your domestic drive-in guest kind of at the bottom, and that's where we're at. So it's kind of scary where the least profitable customer is now the customer base. So I think it's tough to see how that's going to be an easy path, but there's ways to do it. And I think a lot of it is going back to basics. And I love the sign out here that I'm looking at right out on Main. Old school fun is back. And I think that's a fantastic approach.
That's been our message since reopening.
Yeah.
But I got to sort of somewhat disagree in that the casino I just mentioned, San Manuel. Mm-hmm. I went there about, I want to say it was 14 months ago now. Mm-hmm. I was blown away by, it was just a box with some restaurants and slot machines. And I think they have 2,000 slot machines. There were lines for the machines. It was packed. It was busier than any casino in Vegas by far. Their win per unit's more than any casino in Vegas. And I don't see how a casino that's 4 or 5 hour drive from here isn't hurting this market right now, especially. But that's the drive-in market. But if you can just go down the street to San Manuel, who's basically taken operators from Vegas, right? They've taken the Carl Cohens of yesteryear and taken them over there to run their casinos with these tribal locations. That's got to be hurting us because that's our customer in California that would have driven here but now doesn't need to. Maybe instead of coming every month, they're coming twice a year, if that.
Yeah, and I think that's been the adjustment because you did see that big drop in downtown after the year 2000 when that really started to pick up. So yeah, you did see that historically, and I think the question is, how do you convince people to drive past those casinos to come to downtown Las Vegas? And like, for example, when you're allowed to go out to dinner again, if you go out to dinner, is it that you go to the first restaurant, that's the closest to where you live, or do you drive past that restaurant to go someplace else?
Right.
And I'm betting most people drive past the first restaurant. Well, why? And then kind of think backwards from there.
Well, Atlantic City, just going back to Atlantic City real quick, back in, 10, 12 years ago when Pennsylvania and Delaware opened up gaming, Atlantic City didn't evolve, and 6 casinos closed within 2 years of that, right? So because Atlantic City couldn't, adapt to the current situation, they find themselves still struggling to this day, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was the big problem there, was that they had too much success too quickly, where it was the same thing, and I know people who opened the casinos back then, and, they had the stories of lines around the block and people fighting to get, a slot machine and a seat at the craps table, or a seat at the blackjack table. But, the money came so easily, they never really had to innovate, and they never had to add a lot of the other attractions that they did in Las Vegas that made Las Vegas remain successful after California really started firing in all gears. So that was the downfall of Atlantic City there, the gaming industry at least, was that they didn't really go beyond it. Now, some places did, if you could look at Borgata, Harrah's, they definitely did invest a lot of money, and they did some different things. But I think altogether, the city didn't do what they did in Las Vegas.
And I think downtown, and I can only speak really for the plazas, what we've tried to do is just to keep building that personal connection with each and every guest so that they do keep driving past. Because, I mean, that's what we do right now. We want them to keep, walking past the other casinos that they might be staying at to come check us out and build that brand loyalty. That's the best thing that we could do other than, just keep firing on all cylinders and, keep putting out the best product possible.
Yeah, and I think that's the best approach because, people, I think, want that authenticity, and they need that because you can basically, if you just say, well, this is a commodity, I think that's a losing operation because they can get that commodity a lot closer from home. But if you make it that personal relationship, that kind of connection, I think that's when
you can't just stand in the front anymore with cash in your pocket and give it out. You could.
Well, I mean, that would help. That's how you make friends, but I think to keep the friends,
to keep them, I was going to say, because then everyone else will just start doing that down the street.
They will, which actually is what they did in Atlantic City. They tried that where they had the bus wars back in the 80s where, first, okay, take a bus from Philly or New York, we'll give you a roll of quarters, then it's 2 rolls of quarters, and casinos went bankrupt because their marketing spend just got way out of whack.
Yep.
So you can't, you can't just buy.
You can't buy
players.
Business.
Yeah, you can't buy the business.
And the truth is, with today, that's still going on in many cases with table games where guys are giving people front money or some of it back on losses. But the truth is, the minute the guy next door does the same thing or more, they're going to leave you because they're not loyal to you anyway. They're just loyal to the deal. They're just looking for the next big deal. So
Yes.
we've definitely tried to stay away from that. But it seems like the whole industry is doing a better job of that now since the pandemic, because you don't need to focus on the deal as much.
Yeah, that's what our mutual friend Oliver Lovett would call transactional loyalty.
Yeah, Oliver love that, yes. Yeah. Good guy. So tell me, are you following along with all the sports betting? Are you following along with the daily fantasy sports? Where do you see that all heading? Is skill gaming the future in your opinion, or do you just focus on the past?
No, I think that's what's expanding, and kind of my main take is that if you look back at history, human beings have been gambling for about 10,000 years. But we're not gambling the same way that we did 10,000 years ago. So the games are going to change, and it's kind of, in the gaming industry, but I think everywhere we get caught in the trap of thinking, well, the way things have been for the last 5 years is the way they've always been and the way they always will be. And the model with table games and slot machines was very powerful. It worked really well. I think that's changing. I think you will see sports betting start to become a bigger part of the mix. I think the younger customers like that better. If you look at the numbers, if we go back maybe 15 years ago, sports betting was about 1% of the total Nevada gaming win. Now it's about 3%. So it's still pretty small, but I think it's on the upswing. Mm-hmm. And I think stuff like that, I think there's a big future there.
It's so primitive here compared to what it is in Europe. Yeah. Once that catches on here and people are using their cell phones for it and they can stay at home, it's going to be a different ball game for sports betting altogether.
Yeah, and I forget, it's been a while, but the last numbers I read from the UK, I think they said that sports betting was about 15% of their total gaming win. So,
that makes sense.
If we saw something like that here, I could definitely see that.
That would be a huge shift.
It would. Yeah, it would really change things.
So we like to do this on the podcast, and obviously it's different for you because you're an author, but if there's any books on the history of Vegas or, the current casino operations that you would recommend to people, including your own, obviously, what would you suggest?
Well, definitely I'd pick up At the Sands. Other books, there's just so much good stuff out there. And of course, I'm drawing a blank right now, and I'll think of them as soon as I'm driving back to the office. I'll think of a million. But
okay.
Yeah. I'm reading a book now by a woman named Lisa Medford.
Okay.
Called I Can Still Hear the Applause. She was the first nude showgirl in Las Vegas history. So that's the one I would say. Lisa Medford, I Can Still Hear the Applause.
What about James Swain novels?
Yeah, they're good. They're good.
That was a rich question.
Yeah.
I don't know anything.
Yeah, they're good. They're good.
Yeah. Have you read Blood Aces?
If I did, it was a while back.
Story of Benny Binion?
Oh, yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah,
pretty great stories.
Yeah.
Well, before we leave, Dave, let's get back to Carl Cohen. And what was the thing you didn't want to?
Oh, it was the fight with Sinatra. So the ironic thing about Carl Cohen is that people who know who he is know him as the guy who punched Frank Sinatra.
Okay.
Now, what makes this kind of sadly ironic is that throughout his whole career, he had incredible self-discipline, was incredibly focused, could take the angriest guest and calm them down. And, had drunks just berating the staff, and he would come in and just calm it down, and people were in awe of him about this. For one split second, he lost control.
Yeah. And
that defines him. Like, literally, it was in his obituary. Carl Cohen, the man who punched Frank Sinatra.
Old blue eyes he couldn't handle.
Yeah, so I guess the lesson for that is, you've always got to be in control, because the one time you're not, that's what they'll remember.
Could you imagine sitting there in that coffee shop and then watching that interaction happen?
No.
Yeah, it would be pretty scary. It would be pretty scary.
Are you doing any public speaking at the moment?
Oh, yeah. Wherever they'll have me. Yeah, definitely. Although there's not as much of that as there was before the pandemic, but yeah.
Where was the last one you did?
Oh, boy. I did one for the Mob Museum. I think it was last week. They had a nice event down there.
Did you do it in the courtroom?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And it was funny, at one point I mentioned the Keefe Offer Committee, and that was where they did it in Vegas. So, yeah, it was actually in...
what was the subject?
At the Sands.
Oh, you're talking about the book.
Talking about the book, yeah.
Your book.
So the full title of the book is At the Sands, the casino that shaped classic Las Vegas, brought the Rat Pack back together, and went out with a bang, right? And that was just released about a month ago, right?
About
How's
a month
it doing
ago.
so far?
It's doing good. I think people really like it. The people who've read it like it. I've heard a lot of good feedback.
Good. And you can pick that up. Is that available everywhere? It's on Amazon and
Amazon,
Barnes and
Noble. And there's on my website, I've got a universal link, whatever ebook platform people want. There's some pretty obscure ones, so it's available there too.
Okay. When's the audiobook come out?
Audiobook should be out in October, November.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
That'll be good.
If you want to reach out to Dr. Dave, it's at Dr. Dave 702 on Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter.
Right,
yeah.
and then the website dgschwartz.com.
Yep, that's it.
I do have a question for Dave. What is Secrets of the Palms?
I think that was a TV show I was on a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
They had secret. There was we're going back 10 or 15 years now.
Sorry,
for
it was on the list of things you've accomplished. And
We didn't even get a chance to talk about any of the documentaries and film things that you've done. So
yeah, we can have Dave on again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for a while there was a big vogue in these kind of TLC documentaries about Vegas, so I somehow got involved in doing a lot of those talking head stuff.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate having you here, and I'm sure we'll have you back on again with all your history and insight into this town.
I hope so.
We'll be back again soon, but in the meantime, please let us know how we're doing and send us your questions. Just email us at podcast@plazahotelcasino.com or go right to the top and tweet Jonathan at Jonathan Jossel. Also, please follow us on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @PlazaPod, and on Facebook, you can find us at Plaza Podcast. We'll see you next time from right here on the corner of Main Street.